Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Politics in the Pulpit, a lectionary-based preaching resource designed to ask the provocative questions of how politics could appear in our preaching this week. My name is Jacky and Yousouf. I'm a newly retired United Reformed Church minister. I have worked with churches across Birmingham and Bolton and Salford, and as moderator of the United Reformed Church's Mersey Synod. I'm now living in Kendal on the edge of the Lake District. Each week, I'm joined by a different guest, and today I'm very pleased to introduce the Revd Yousouf Gooljary. Yousouf is a retired Anglican priest, currently working on projects challenging racism and the legacy of slavery in Scotland. Yousouf has 2 sons and 3 grandchildren, and works as a supply teacher in Edinburgh schools, teaching science. His current responsibilities include being a committee member of cross-party group Holyrood Challenging Racism and Religious Prejudice, and as the moderator of the Iona community Challenging Racism Common Concern Network. So Yousouf, welcome, and thanks very much for coming on the podcast this week.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'd like to start by asking you whether you think politics and the pulpit do mix.
Absolutely. I was looking at the Mark passage and Mark in general, and we find Jesus walking along, picking corn on the Sabbath, or going out of his way to find people from out with his culture in Syrophoenicia. And he's challenging the Pharisees directly with the Sabbath. I think his actions are quite political, in fact, in Mark. And he's trying to come out with his normal cultural bounds or restrictions. And I think also the other thing about that is that the gospel kind of relates to the whole of life. So clearly, politics is part of the life that we lead. So how we structure society and everything else. So it has a lot to do with it.
Great. And just some headlines that surround our context today. A report is just out by leading UK scientists saying that lives are being blighted by increasingly unhealthy childhoods. It highlights a series of worrying health trends, including a stalled infant mortality rate, a decline in vaccine uptake, soaring obesity, and preventable tooth decay. The underlying problem is increasingly deep poverty in the UK, and the report urges politicians to act now to boost well-being. The UK and the US military have continued to attack positions in Iraq that they believe are linked to the Iranian-backed Yemeni groups. That's the 3rd such coordinated attack on Saturday. A group of Methodists are meeting this morning to discuss an arms fair that's being organised in their area. With all the violence in the world today, many are questioning the UK's desire to establish itself as the world's 2nd largest arms exporter. The unpredictable weather in the UK continues to bring concern. We're due to have spring temperatures followed by snow and the potential for flooding this week. A grandmother in Essex has died after a dog attack whilst visiting her grandson. The Grammy Awards have recognised the contributions of musicians, songwriters, producers and engineers, including the Best New Artist R&B star, Victoria Monet, the first time since 2002 that a female R&B act has received the award. And some more good news. Due to the work over the last 40 years, including a 6-month truce in the Sudanese war, the world is very close to eliminating guinea worm, which lead to debilitating pain for those infected by them. Last year, cases were down from 3.5 million to 13 across 4 African countries. Church-wise, this coming Sunday is Transfiguration Sunday. February is LGBT plus History Month. And this coming Sunday, the 11th, is both Racial Justice Sunday and Church Action on Poverty Sunday. And of course, Lent starts on Wednesday, the 14th of February. The readings for this Sunday are 2 Kings 2, 1-12, 2 Corinthians 4, 3-6, Psalm 50, 1-6, and Mark 9, 2-9. So, Yousouf, where would you start with this week's readings?
Yes, I think I would start with the Gospel reading, the Transfiguration. I think it's quite relevant for Racial Justice Sunday, in fact, because we find Jesus on the mountain, transfigured. I mean, he's the same Christ as before. He hasn't changed. But what happens is there's a change in the disciples that witness this like godlike event. And I think they're changed when they come back down the mountain. If you're reading Mark, you'll see Jesus is action man for the first half. He's over 15 miracles, demons, casting out. He's just doing everything. And the disciples are like in awe. Then they go up the mountain and he comes back down and they hear God's voice saying, "This is my son, listen to him." So the next chapter of Mark, when they come back down the mountain, is really about them sitting at Jesus' feet and listening to his teaching. There's very few miracles. I think he raises a boy who's nearly dead, and he heals Bartimaeus, who's blind. That's about it. So there's been a change in the disciples, I think, on the mountain. And I think the way I would access this would be to think, well, have I ever had a mountaintop experience? Or, have I ever seen something which I would stand in awe of? And yes, I would. A sunset, a beautiful sunset, I would stand in awe of. And it would have a deep resonance within me. And the mountaintop experience I might add is I was on top of Dunny and Iona, and a cloud descended, literally, and you could not see the edge of Dunny. Now, it's a very small hilltop, but regardless, I was leading a pilgrimage of the 15 people behind me. So they had to trust when I said it's this way. Nobody knew which way it was. So they all followed me off this hillock. It could have been dangerous because we could have got off the edge. So there you go. But what they didn't know is that I'd been running up and down Dunny for the last 4 weeks. I was working on Iona. So I knew the way down. So there was a kind of trust in that. There was a confidence in me that I knew what I was doing. And I think that empowerment that the disciples face on the mountain is really important for them when they come back down. And I think that resonance is to do with Racial Justice Sunday, because we need to change. We need to change how we see things, our understanding, our perspective. We need to get more literate about racism. We need to basically join in that conversation with institutional racism and how that affects society. And churches are well placed to be educators and places where you can actually, bring these issues forward and use your whatever resources you have to educate people.
Because part of what comes from the cloud is listen to him. And at that time, the disciples didn't want to hear about the cross and trouble ahead.
Mm-hmm.
What is it we don't want to hear today?
Well, I'm not sure. I think we maybe are feel guilty about the past, so we're not sure how to deal with when faced with the consequences, say, of slavery going back centuries. I see that in Scotland when I'm trying to campaign on the legacy of slavery, and people feel a little bit disempowered. They feel guilty. They don't know what to do. So I kind of said to them, well, there are 4 things you can do. You can commemorate the event. You can acknowledge it within your own church, on your websites. You can research it, and then you can educate your people. So that CARE, care. So we can care about racism today. Because once we know or we're enlightened to that situation, we've got to do something about it. You simply can't then not do something about it.
And going to the Corinthians reading,
yeah,
we're talking about the gospel being veiled. Is that part of this people not being willing to address things?
Yeah, I think the gospel may be veiled. I think the interpretation of the gospel, my own hermeneutic or my own unveiling of the gospel, relates to cultural diversity. So I'm always looking for the cultural diversity angle in the passage or the thing that I'm doing. So, for example, in Mark, you've got Jesus going off to the Syrophoenician woman, and he goes through this discourse with her where he changes. He initially is quite culturally, not very nice to the woman from his own culture, but then he changes, and because of what she says, he heals her daughter. So that kind of change that we have within us, I think, is a potential for all of us to do that. But the other thing about the Corinthians passage, it ends with let light shine out of darkness, who shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of Christ. So this idea of light shining out of the darkness, I think, is illuminating. Relates to the transfiguration, the illumination there. It relates to illumination in understanding, in developing our own understanding.
And how can we put the spotlight, if you like, on those things we want people to see without shining the spotlight on ourselves instead of Christ?
It's to do with, I think perhaps education. I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether anybody would show a YouTube video in their service which would deal with, say, an example of stereotyping or discrimination or norming or labeling or anything else. But I think that would be a good thing to do. I think that would be a good way that we could actually perhaps address some of this misunderstanding within our own congregations or the church. So I would suggest that is probably a way to do that.
Yeah, that sounds like a really positive idea. And a lot of churches these days have got the ability to do that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So if we're asking people to change,
yeah,
and wanting to change our world, are there things in that are going on in the world at the moment that you want to highlight? Or
there's in our own country, I think I was looking at the Macpherson report 20 years on, and the 2010 Equalities Act doesn't have a definition of institutional racism. I mean, it doesn't. Nobody has one, and yet we're faced regularly with this concept, with this idea, with this challenge, where people are suffering from institutional racism, whether it's the police in Scotland, whether it's the NHS or other institutions. And what I'd like to see, I think, is some sort of involvement, some sort of definition which could be used and incorporated in law, which I think then would help. I think our current road to integration, or what we're trying to do in England. Well, I mean, in England, Scotland, and Wales. Yeah.
I mean, simply because that certainly is not something I wasn't aware of. It's a phrase that is used so frequently these days that to think there isn't an official definition, it seems very strange.
Yes. It was in the Macpherson inquiry. I think it was the assistant police officer who first raised it 22 odd years ago, and he wasn't picked up. And he suggested that it would be actually a good idea to include that within UK law. But again, it's quite a hard road to try and get that campaigned into people's minds. I think Oxford Diocese recently, when I spoke to them, are actually looking at it. In fact, funnily enough, and they may progress that idea a bit further.
Yeah, I suppose there's so many things that you can only concentrate on one or two at a time, or you're in a difficult place.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just pausing for a moment to think about the King's reading, and it feels like Elisha doesn't want to leave Elijah, a bit like Ruth and Naomi. Is there an importance to being there for things to change, or simply so that you can then carry on the transformation, if you like?
I'm not sure about the King's reading, but what that brings me to think of is the fact that the disciples on the mountain see Elijah with Moses talking to Jesus. And just before that in Mark, there'd been some confusion about, Jesus said, who do people think I am? And they said, well, they said, oh, maybe you're Elijah, or maybe you're a prophet. So I think the point of the mountaintop thing experience is that it clearly distinguishes that Jesus isn't one of those two. And you find these three ordinary blokes who say, well, let's build a tabernacle. And I think that dawned on me that that was something to do with hospitality, and they were trying to be hospitable to the people that they saw there, and that was what that might have been about. So I don't know whether the King's reading has any resonances with hospitality at all, because I mean that's where I would come at it from.
I don't know. That's not something that. Yeah, I can't see much resonance with hospitality there. Certainly, obviously, Elijah, and I guess that's why it's the lectionary for this week. Mm-hmm. And Jesus being, if you like, influenced by the law and being a prophet, but standing apart from Elijah and Moses. It must have been quite an experience for the disciples, as you say, transforming them.
Yes.
Can it transform us today, do you think?
Well, I think it does. I think if we can see the beauty and the goodness in things, and be inspired, if you like, to move from where we are to a better place of understanding. I think listening to God speak, listening to how we follow Jesus, I think listening to what's in the way of that, and what gets in the way of us following. So basically, I think he does speak to us today, and we can change. I think that's the power of the gospel stories, is that it's about empowerment. So Racial Justice Sunday really should be about empowering our congregations or our churches to change, or to be more understanding, or to be more aware of the issues, to be literate, actually. I think we need to develop a literacy around racism, and that's the whole thing, and that's one of the functions of the church, I think, would be to do that.
And having helped people to become more literate, how do we encourage them to actually, if you like, do something about it? Because the folk are very reluctant to say anything when they see something that's wrong, or that jars, which hopefully being more literate they would see more often. Mm-hmm. But there's another step, isn't there, from that jarring to actually saying something or doing something when somebody does discriminate or whatever.
Yeah. I think it's about creating or enabling our churches to be anti-racist churches, and that's we have to make a commitment for that. We need to write that into our church policy, or whatever it is we do. And once we've got that as our kind of aim, we can work out strategies. And the CTBI have got something out for Racial Justice Sunday. I think it's the Exodus theme, and it's quite a good resource with prayers and liturgies, and that's really dealing with welcoming or not being racist towards asylum seekers or migrants or anything else. So they've cottoned onto that thing, and individual churches, I think, have responded to that CTBI by suggesting what they could do locally. I noticed one church in Nottingham, I think, worked up what it could do locally to assist with this. So I think it's for each church in its locality to decide how best to address. I think one of the suggestions was to invite somebody from a global majority, either church or non-church, in to speak at the church, to the congregation. It's a simple thing to connect with other people who are doing that kind of work locally. I mean, have you ever engaged with anybody who's challenging racism in your locality? Do you know what the issues are? There's a lot to be done, really, once we start thinking that way. So that's what I would encourage people to do.
So, this being Racial Justice Sunday, this coming Sunday, would you start from there and look at the readings and say, or would you start from the readings and say, right, what have they got to say about racial justice today?
I would probably go topical with Racial Justice Sunday, not exegetical or anything like that, and say, well, this is about change, and who's being changed and for what reason, and this change that occurs in the ordinary disciples, because they see a godlike event, which is absolutely amazing. We, as we progress in our own faith, can, I believe, be inspired to change or to work for change. So I think that would be my topic as to how we could go about that.
And certainly, I mean, there's a lot of talk generally about wanting to change the world at the moment.
Yeah.
And so many things that folk want to change. And I guess part of it is getting change, the sort of change that we're concerned about on folks' agenda, and enabling them to feel that they can make a difference.
Yes. I think that's the thing about the literacy thing. If we empower people or give them the tools where they feel enabled to be agents of change, but also part of the, if you like, training in understanding racism or something like that is about changing ourselves. We need to be able to be changed first in order then to engage with change in a wider sense. So a lot of the things about understanding our own prejudice or understanding our own stereotyping or how we norm or our own unconscious bias or everything else. So the more we can do that, the more we then can, if you like, if we're part of an institution, recognize our part in, causing that institution to be discriminatory in some way.
And I know you mentioned to me that you have various tools, if you like, that can help people. I don't know if you want to mention those now, and we'll make sure that Rue puts them out so that people can access them later.
Yes, I for my own sins have produced a YouTube video called Understanding Racism, with my name next to it. And it's a 15-minute long video, but it has exercises all the way through, so it could last much longer. So you could take it in sections, say dealing with stereotyping or normaling or labeling, and just deal with one aspect of it. It also deals with the sort of ideology of white superiority or racism and how that developed over the centuries and everything else. So, but it's very interactive, so it's very much you're doing an exercise rather than being talked at. The other thing is a website on Challenge Racism Scotland, which looks at the legacy of slavery in Scotland, but is asking the question, how much of our country has been affected, or the economy of our country has been affected by the history of the economy of plantation slavery, the goods that were transported, the inheritances that were received, which then built the estates and the buildings, the churches that we belong to. And the other thing I would point you to is a liturgy called A Simple Liturgy to Challenge Racism, which is published in Common Ground, the Wild Goose Publications, which actually takes you through the conversation that Jesus has with the Syrophoenician woman, and is a way of actually understanding how Jesus overcomes his own cultural prejudice and actually comes to a point of understanding with the woman who then has her daughter healed. So I think we need more things like this. I think we need more liturgy. We need more spiritual tools really on this subject. And I think that's what I would encourage people to kind of work on really.
Is there anywhere that these can be collected if folk have something in their back pocket, so to speak, or if they work on something, that they can then make it available for others?
You mean where could they find it? Oh.
Well, no, if people have perhaps worked on this sort of thing, or just for their own church, or for is there anywhere it can be gathered or?
Yes, well, I'm moderator of the Common Concerns Network of the Iona community, Challenging Racism. So I have an email which is ccnchallengingracism.iona.org.uk. So that could be a place where it could be a centre of collecting, if you like, the good practice that people are doing. That would be an interesting exercise, and also then that I would be able then to, if you like, disseminate that through the other networks that I'm part of, or that people are part of.
Oh, thank you for that. And I say we'll make sure that that information is available for folk afterwards. So, what haven't we covered yet that you'd like to add about today's readings, or what you'll be preaching about this week?
I think Racial Justice Sunday is about changing, the world and ourselves. Transfiguration itself, we need to define transfiguration rather than think it's some sort of change. The change comes in the people who actually witness the event, and it could be that racism is actually a disfiguration. So it's the other side of that coin. So we need to kind of be aware of how that impacts, I think, our society and our churches and our laws. And I think that it's a lot of work to do, really, I think, for us. But, I think it's a call to, it's a fundamental, I think, Christian thing to be anti-racist. It's not it's an optional extra. I think the whole of the gospel was about increasing cultural diversity. The whole path of it was towards going into the world. So you had the mission to the Gentiles. You have the diversity in the disciples themselves. So I think it's quite a lead that the Bible gives us towards inclusivity. Yeah. And I think that's the call that we have as Christians, myself.
And it's a high calling.
Yeah.
And I guess transformation takes work, doesn't it? And we have to remember that it's not something that happens without a great deal of effort on your part and a lot of people's part and on everybody's part. Yousouf, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom and reflections with us today. And thank you to the rest of you for joining us to ask whether or how we should preach politics from the pulpit this week. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts and share the episode with your friends. We also have online spaces for further engagement and discussion about faith and politics on X or Twitter @Public Issues, or using #PoliticsInThePulpit. And we have a Facebook group which you can access through the Joint Public Issues Team's Facebook page and the website jpit.uk. That's jpit.uk. Let's go into both our politics and our pulpits with a prayer based on the United Reformed Church's worship notes for Sunday the 11th, written by John Grundy. As we journey between the mountaintops and the plains of life, may the transforming power of God inspire us. May the challenging and comforting grace of Jesus guide us. And may the companionship of the Holy Spirit walk with us. And may we journey knowing the love of God within us today and every day. Amen.
Amen.